the less attention other parts of the world pay to Africa, the better for Africa.
Hi, I'm Ian Bremmer, and welcome to the GZERO World. I've got a special show for you this week from Munich, Germany. I just came back from the Munich Security Conference, about 30 heads of state, ministers in charge of defense and security and lots of other things from all over the world, particularly transatlantic. And it was kind of a depressing meeting, whether you're talking about war over Syria, conflict with North Korea, U.S.-China, U.S.-Russia, cyber terrorism. Not a lot of solutions being offered, not a lot of feeling that we're in a stable place either. This week, though, I have a very special interview for you. I sat down with Paul Kagame. He's the president of Rwanda. He brought the country out of genocide and has presided over one of the most successful economic stories that the African continent has seen. Also has extended his rule, taken some hits on that from the democracy advocates, as well as hits to the free press. We'll be talking about all that and more in just a bit. But first, your world this week. Big news this week is from China. Xi Jinping changes his country's constitution from 1982. It's no longer just a president for 2 terms. It's for as long as he can get away with it. And that's an enormous change, right? I mean, for the last 20 years, there's been this presumption in the West that as China gets wealthier, they're going to need to eventually politically reform, becomes more like us. Well, I mean, when it's President Xi for life, I think it's pretty decisive. You're not having any political reform. In fact, it's a very strong consolidation. Couple reasons that's important. First, it's harder for the Americans to work closely with the Chinese. The strategy had been a lot of people in the private sector, you can engage more with them. A lot of people that are interested in being more technocratic reformers economically, you can work more with them. But when everyone's under Xi Jinping, it's his way or the highway, makes it tougher for a U.S.-China relationship, especially as the Americans start moving towards tougher trade relationship with Beijing. Also, in China itself, near term, this is fine. Xi Jinping's a strong leader, he's a popular leader, and he can absolutely continue to move towards plowing money into the strategic sectors and the initiatives that he wants. But the biggest question with any authoritarian regime is, how do you handle the transition? And if all roads lead to Xi Jinping, what happens if he gets sick? What happens if he dies? What happens when there is a normal transition? If the institutions are all about him and there's no alternative, it becomes a lot more dangerous and ultimately perhaps even corrosive for society. And for a country that's soon going to be the world's largest economy, that's a big deal not just for U.S.-China relations, but a big deal for the world. Germany is nearing a government. It's been almost 6 months since they've had one. The only country I can think of any size has had 2 economic upgrades domestically without anyone governing the place. A lot of complacency in the country because whatever happens, they feel like they'll be just fine. There are some alternatives. Will the Social Democrats end up voting in favor of a grand coalition? They're polling as badly as the Alternatives for Deutschland party, which is astonishing given how important they've been historically. They're about 16% right now. Probably means they do vote in favor, probably means they join a grand coalition, and if they don't, Merkel probably ends up running a minority government. But either way, it's a lot weaker Merkel than we've had before. And that's what really matters. It's not a German crisis we're worried about, but you know when the Greek crisis happened? If it hadn't have been for a strong Merkel and a strong Schäuble, the then Minister of Finance, that Greek crisis probably wouldn't have been resolved. The country could have been outside of the Eurozone, and you would have had contagion across European economies. Now, I don't know where the next European crisis is going to come from, and frankly, neither do you. But I do know that the ability of a strong German government to respond to it is not going to be what it used to be. That's the biggest takeaway from whatever happens this weekend. And yes, we're still talking about the war over Syria. Lots of countries in close proximity, and a lot of people are dying. Right now, the focus is in Ghouta, just outside of Damascus. Over 500 dead, including over 100 children. And that recently led this journalist to ask this question of President Trump and Prime Minister Turnbull of Australia.
As 2 of the most powerful men in the entire world, is there anything that you can do to stop the bloodshed?
Let me try my hand at answering that. There is no political solution because you don't have the military might to enforce one or the willingness. And as long as that is true of the Americans, of the Russians, of the Iranians, of the Turks, of the Israelis, of everyone with an axe on the ground in Syria, you end up with Bashar Assad, who we said we wanted out, not going anywhere. He is trying inch by inch to retake territory. Nobody's going to stop him, and he will be as brutal as necessary to ensure that's the case. That means more war, more humanitarian devastation, and more questions like the one you just heard. And now, we've got your puppet regime.
Mr. Kim, Donald Trump says he will stop you from getting a nuclear weapon that can hit the continental United States. What do you say?
From my cold dead hands, Mr. Ian. From my cold dead...
He's not lying, folks.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Ian. Will Mr. Donald give up his nuclear weapons?
I highly doubt.
Well, then we cannot have nuclear weapons in the hands of only one erratic leader with spectacular hair.
Well, I suppose.
Did you see what happened to Gaddafi? And to Hussein? And to Phil Jackson? Very sad. Only one thing can stop a bad man with a nuclear weapon. And that is a good man with a nuclear weapon.
But nuclear weapons could kill us all.
Nuclear weapons do not kill people, Mr. Ian. Supreme disrespect comrade leaders and mentally deranged dotards kill people.
Puppet regime! Give me a sense of how did that go personally? Just the charisma, the engagement.
I'm here in Munich with President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, also head of the African Union. Delighted to see you here, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you, Ian.
I want to start just with the state of Africa because a lot's going on right now. We've had a surprise transition in Zimbabwe. We've had maybe a little less of a surprise transition in South Africa. We've had another surprise transition in Ethiopia. Do you see some common thread going through all of these changes?
Africa is more and more integrated in the rest of the world. This connectedness really informs people and drives people to do things they want to do, and raises even the level of aspiration. And there's always going to be one way or the other where that correction is made so that the demands and aspirations of these people are met.
Now that certainly helps to explain Zimbabwe in a big way. It certainly helps to explain South Africa. Ethiopia, of course, has been talked about as one of the economic miracles in Africa.
It still remains, Ethiopia still remains a good performer in terms of the kinds of developments that have taken place and the growth of the economy, and doing really a lot of good things for their people, there's no doubt. But at the same time, they may raise other questions from within, and saying, okay, this is fine, we are doing this, but maybe there are political issues here we have to address. The fact that, for example, the Prime Minister resigned, I think that's a very healthy thing. That means he didn't stay and say, no, let's fight it out, and the winner in the end takes all or something. He said, no, okay, if my resignation, and having been there and associated with everything that was going on, is going to open up for more integration of different actors that act in different interests for the people of Ethiopia, if that's what it means, I'm giving in for that. I think that's a good thing.
So you know what I have to ask, of course, in that regard, which is that, you have now been president with one of the most exceptional economic stories in all of Africa, but also one that's been criticized for being too politically closed. Do you take any personal lessons from what's happening in Ethiopia right now? Does it change the way you think at all?
I think always you are going to look at any situation anywhere in the world and want to relate it with whatever is happening, even with you and your own country. What makes my country different, as of now at least, is that so far, so good with what the country is doing. And the measure is simply on the expressions of the same people. The difference with what has happened in my country and with any other case you may refer to is that when it came to 2017, I actually wanted to go.
To end your term, that's it.
The change that happened in the Constitution was entirely nothing to do with me. Well, it had to do with me in terms that it affected me in terms of whether I leave or stay, but my choice was to leave.
But you're legitimately very popular in Rwanda right now. Right now, not just in 17, right now, very clear. Why take tough measures against the media in your country when there's already so much support for you?
You know, Rwanda is the most connected country actually presently in Africa, right? Yeah. The level of, people have their mobile phones, they are connected. If you look at the things they say on their platforms, there is no censoring, there is no blocking of anything. So when they talk about the media, I don't know which media people are talking about.
Another measure of success for a leader is what comes after. And I wonder how you're thinking about the next generation, grooming a set of leaders who will be able to take the country forward, especially if you were ready to step down a couple of years ago. What were you thinking about who's next, and is the country ready post-Kagame?
Actually, I didn't even have to think so hard about who is next in terms of making it particular.
Not one person. I mean,
this is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was comfortable that from the pool of people we have, actually we would find one. That is from my position. That was my viewpoint. And for the simple reason, for the last 24 years, we have been there. I've been there in the last 24 years in different capacities. But we have actually educated, trained our people. We have had others who were stateless and were outside of the country, who have come back. The amount of investments we have made to develop people and to develop skills and these different capacities that would even be required, and the level of their participation even in the politics of our country, is such that I'm comfortable that come the day when people decide that not only I don't even have to wait for that, and what we have gone through has been an issue of timing, because it's like people said, no, give us more time. It wasn't like stay there forever. That's the way I understood it, and I think that's the way it is.
You met with my president just a few weeks ago, President Trump. Controversial on Africa. It was right after he made his comment about whole countries. Did you ask him about that?
In a way that is more civil than people would have expected. We naturally had to talk about that. But also with the background that it is as if no one is sure what was even said. Because people, including himself, people say, no, it was either misrepresented or actually they didn't hear it, others heard it. And I mean, I didn't find it correct that I would dwell on such. And as you said, Trump being the president of the United States, I'm more interested in how Africa and United States can come together.
Did you come away with anything specific?
Yes, because in fact, after that, the president wrote a letter to the African Union expressing how he wants to work with Africa and African leaders, and even mentioned my meeting with him in Davos, which message for me was important enough that he was reaching out and saying, I mean to work well with Africa and I'm serious about it. And I thought, for me, that is the most important thing.
And you said at the beginning of the interview that Africa is doing a lot more for itself, and that's a positive thing. Absolutely. But in part, that's also so necessary because there's been so little from everyone else.
The less attention other parts of the world pay to Africa, the better for Africa. Because they have been paying wrong attention. They've been paying attention to Africa as just a basket case, which is not correct. We will therefore, on that basis, work with different countries or parts of the world more as partners. I think this is what we all intended to see, more as partners. If it is China, we work with China. China works with the United States. Europe works with China. Everybody works with everybody. Every day we are asked these questions. So, oh, what is China doing in Africa? What do you think? As if there's something sinister going on. If there is, it's not China entirely to blame. I think even we Africans should take the blame, because why would you allow somebody to come and relate to you in an exploitative manner or doing wrong things and then taking more than they are bringing to you? I think it's not their mainly. It's not themselves to blame alone. It's we ourselves should take responsibility for that. I think that is what is at the heart of the matter and the thinking we have in Africa to look at how we relate with people in the rest of the world.
President Kagame, thank you very much. Great to see you again.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
That's our show for this week. Be back next week for Joe Kennedy from the U.S. Congress, representative of Massachusetts, and gave that rebuttal to Donald Trump's first State of the Union speech. We'll show you that and more next week.